Welcome to the Prelude Talks. The Prelude Talks are an online series that leads towards Headspace 2018, an event which presents scientific and creative investigation into the determinants of a healthy brain. The speakers in this series are from diverse disciplines. They indicate the territory of the event, which has two ambitions. One is approaching complex issues with innovation, and the other is seeking knowledge from a diversity of expertise to bring fresh insight to enduring challenges. So, they're designed as a growing archive, and currently available online are Kate Goodwin on building an architecture of care, David Cottrell on the limits of empathy, Felicity Callard on the social self, and myself, Dominic Campbell, on celebration as strategy. And we're delighted that today we can add to that Alice Thwaite, who's talking about improving older people's lives through creativity. So they're a very diverse group. What connects them is that in their own practice, each speaker examines the relationship between information gathering, decision making, and delivery. They operate across existing systems of knowledge and understanding, and they're often wrestling with how knowledge is made, articulated, how power is engaged with, and how systemic bias sometimes is encountered. We've invited each of them to talk to the edge of their comfort zone and at the edge of what they know, and we're very grateful that they're willing to do so. Today, Alice Thwaite, who is the founder of Equal Arts. Equal Arts is a 30-year-old company based in the north-east of England, whose speciality has been working with ageing populations for a good time. But rather than talk for Alice, I let Alice talk for herself.
Thank you, Dominic, for the introduction. I'm very pleased to be here and to be part of this series. I'm going to talk about the organisation Equal Arts and our involvement with creative ageing. We're a small northeast charity based in the UK, and we have developed a way of working with older people to enable everyone to have access to creative practice. I'm going to talk about the importance of storytelling with older people. Often reminiscence has been seen as being the kind of go-to way of working with older people, which is about looking back at important areas of people's lives in order to give them context for their own life now. What we've realised over the years is that actually working particularly with people with dementia, that reminiscence isn't necessarily a very positive way of working if people have memory issues, that actually asking people about their past isn't a useful way of working with them. So the concept of storytelling, creating stories that are meaningful for people, is now prevalent throughout the world of arts and dementia. And we work with all kinds of different props and different ways of engaging people with dementia to ensure that they feel part of the story, that everything that they contribute is acknowledged and celebrated. And in this way, a lot of issues around depression with dementia, people's confidence builds if their thoughts and ideas are taken seriously and incorporated into stories. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we work around community-based developing relationships across generations and intergenerational work. We recognise that older people, particularly older people with dementia, often begin to become isolated in their communities, and particularly around care settings. We work in about 60 care homes in the northeast, and deliver programmes that are about opening up those care settings to enable them to connect with their local community. So artists are an important part of this dynamic. They're like the glue between the outer world in terms of schools, communities, local arts organisations, and the care homes, which are often very inward looking and think of care in terms of being around physical care and keeping people safe, which obviously is incredibly important, but have very little around the engagement of. And what's so fantastic about working with artists is that you get a sense of the possible. With artists, the answers are always in the questions that people ask. So coming into a situation like a care home, instead of thinking about what isn't possible and being risk averse and the fact that people can't go out, artists come with a spirit of what happens if we bring in this type of art form, these kinds of musicians, try and create something new with people who generally people are seeing as being not able to contribute anymore. And that is the beauty of working with artists. And it's particular artists who have an idea that their work is affected by working with other people. So it's definitely a relationship between the artist, the care setting, and the residents who live in the home, rather than it being one way. So I don't see this work as being about artists giving to people who live in care homes. It's about the developing the relationship between the care home and the artist. And this can happen in all different kinds of ways. It's we work with visual artists, with musicians, with dancers, and it's about that dynamic of asking interesting questions. So there's now been a huge amount of evidence around the importance of dance for brain health. But what I think is particularly interesting is when the concept of dance is about peer support as well as actual individual enjoyment. We've worked with a fantastic group of dancers who age between 60 and 90, contemporary dance group, who then work in care settings dancing with residents, particularly those with dementia. So it's this, again, a reciprocal relationship building between contemporary dancers and people in care homes, where you would not expect to find that kind of edge, cutting edge, interesting artwork. But again, it's not being done to, it's about the relationship that the dancers get from introducing dance into a care home. And I think there's lots more evidence to be gained about how that affects the atmosphere of a care home, how it affects the individual and how it affects the organisation. I'm sure there'll be people in this series talking about the importance of visual arts and museums with this work around arts and dementia, because we now have quite a history, having had the work at MoMA. So the photograph on the left is from MoMA, where they set up the Meet Me at MoMA for groups of people with dementia. But we have similar work going on in the Northeast, working in art galleries. We're now working in 7 Northeast galleries, developing arts and dementia groups, specifically to enable people to respond to the collections in those museums, both individually and collectively. So the picture on the right is Tintoretto in our local Shipley Art Gallery. And what's interesting about the group that we're working there is it's about the different interpretation of the work that you would get from, so the outreach people would be working with children, explaining the history of the Tintoretto, explaining what the importance of that work, whereas when you bring in a group of people with arts and dementia, in terms of their response to the work, it's very different and very individual, and it doesn't need to be about the history particularly, although some people might be interested in that, but it's about what the work, what impact the work has on those people. And again, this is an area where there's growing evidence about the importance of creativity for people with dementia to actually respond to artwork in different ways. And it has a huge impact on the gallery itself in terms of a different audience and a different response to the work than working specifically with children and young people. We've been part of a growing movement around arts and dementia, and we are now supporting work in Italian galleries. So the Marino Marini Gallery in Florence came to us to talk about how we can support their work and the work of other galleries across Tuscany to develop arts and dementia projects. So the picture is of a lady working on an iPad that has particular pictures to do with the gallery and then different responses. We're quite keen to do multi-sensory work because we know that it's important to cover lots of senses, particularly around working with people with dementia. So if one is compromised, then other senses can be a way through, a way in, a way to connect with people. So the artist Claire Ford went over from the northeast to work in Italy, and they are now keen to explore how to work with artists in galleries across Tuscany, which is fantastic. I'm going to say a little bit more about how I see this work affecting relationship-centred care. I think we all know the work of Tim Kitwood, who developed the idea of person-centred care being the most important. So you put the person at the centre, person with dementia at the centre of care, person in a care home. But I think what that misses, and what we see more and more as being important, is the idea of developing relationship-centred care, which values the care worker and the responses that they have with the person with dementia, so that what's key is developing those relationships. I think at the moment people are talking about the crisis in social care, the crisis in care homes, and so much of that is about the lack of commitment, the lack of support for care workers. In the next 5 years we're going to need next 20 years we're going to need 1 million more care workers in the UK. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people who at the moment are undervalued, underpaid, under-resourced. And what we found with working with care staff is that if you develop their own creativity and nurture their creativity and find that the relationship between the residents in their care and themselves can blossom through creative activity, you'll have a better way of retaining staff, developing staff, and we see this as part of that jigsaw of ensuring that we can change how people see the care world. And it's incredibly important that we do that. I think without that we do have a huge crisis on our hands. But if we see it as a profession that people want to go into because they know that it's they can develop their own creativity through it. So rather than having artists on one side, care workers on another, there is this kind of hybrid of people. We actually work with a lot of people who've come from a mental health background or a nursing background and then do an arts degree, or the other way round, and it's a combination of those skills which is what we, I think, really need and is incredibly important. The pictures on the left are in a care home working with an artist doing large portraits, and on the right is some glasswork made by a group of people who this actually beautiful piece of work ended up in their medical centre, their local health centre, because it was very much about the local area, and they created the piece of work working with an artist. We said, where do you want to put the piece of work? And they said, well, we're often in the medical centre, so that might be a good place for it to go. And it's had a really good impact. So I'm going to say a little bit more about care staff training, because it is an area that, when Dominic said we needed to think about where this work is heading, and something slightly, I mean, it's not out of my comfort zone, but I think it's definitely out of the comfort zone of the field, is the idea of how we sit, how we train care staff and artists to do this work. So this, we've worked for about 5 years with the Care Alliance in the Northeast, which is a fantastic group that originally that they were looking just at how to train care staff to do lifting, mandatory kind of stuff around care, physical care. And we've been working with them to say, well, actually, this important part of creativity and how people respond can be a really important part of their work. So we've actually been training care staff for the last 5 years. And this is people learning to play the ukulele, which is a fantastic and exciting instrument. And the idea that you can have those moments of exchange, of creative exchange in the day is incredibly important. The statistic in the UK is that only 3% of a resident's day is spent in proper interaction, and the rest is sleeping or eating or sitting, which is a shocking statistic which we are trying to change. So the idea that care staff can have that interaction, have that creative exchange, which is good for both parties, good for everyone, to create a different kind of atmosphere is incredibly important, and to invest in those people who are, have lots of creative talents themselves. The other really important area about growing this work is about artist training. So we work with a really wide variety of artists, socially engaged artists who come to us with an interest of working with people. What's important to us that they have their own practice in whatever that is. It's either visual arts, music, drama. We work with a lot of people with a drama background, which is interesting. All the art forms possible, animators, anything you can think of really. But the people need to have a really good background in their own practice, but also a real interest, as I said earlier, in how the working with people can engage them and feed them as artists, and what they then deliver in sessions. The film that you'll see later is by two artists who actually moved into a care home. Having done lots of sessional work, 2 hours is often the way that artists that get to go into care homes, they were very keen to look at how to live in a care home and make work with staff and residents for a month. So it's a very exciting, different way of working, and I actually think a residency programme for artists in care settings is really where we should be heading. So the idea of training care staff, but then having artists coming in and doing residencies in a much more engaged way than the kind of 2-hour sessions. It's Thursday afternoon, we're going to do some dance. I think you need to get away from that kind of idea that that's how art is made, really, and look at art in a much broader sense of the moments. The larger, in the film you can see the way Kate Sweeney describes the art is what happens in the exchange, and then the artists also then make pieces of work from that. So there's a really interesting mixture of the art in the moment and what you can create to show the world a different side of this world, this internal world. And I think that's extremely important way forward, and I would suggest that both care homes and arts organisations look at different models of working together, so to get away from this kind of slightly false idea of that you can do art in a 2-hour session and that's it for the week, and the rest of the time you're going to sit in your chair. So how we work with artists is we often have shadowing. So artists who have really extremely good practice will be shadowed by artists who are interested in getting involved in this work. And there are guiding principles really about about the way the work is developed. And I think a genuine interest is key. Nobody should do this work, A, for the money, or for purely their own art form. So what I would call body snatching, the idea that an artist goes in, gets some good ideas about how these people live and goes away and makes a piece of work. I think there has to be something that's more genuine around the exchange, about the interest in the people, about genuine interest and genuine care around, and a kind of ethical way of working with people. But I would say that of working with all people, whatever engagement you're going to do if you're working with the community. The thing that I think works extremely well with Equal Arts is the fact that we have this pool of artists who know each other and know each other's practice. So, I mean, we're adding to it all the time, but what's exciting is that we can have a musician saying, this project seems to demand that I work with a visual artist. You know, that seems to be something. So then to bring those two people together to create work with people, rather than the isolation. I think a lot of this work is very isolated in other parts of the country and possibly the world. And I think to create that community of artists who have an understanding and are supported to do the work well is extremely important. I hope that's where the UK is heading in terms of the understanding and the need for support for artists who are socially engaged artists, and I would hope that Ireland would be the same. Internationally, I know that in Italy it's very interesting talking to the artist educators from the galleries who don't have a history at all of making work. It's about art education, so that's quite a jump again about the idea of changing from art education to art making with people. So there's a variety of ways of delivery, but I do think our model that enables artists to work with each other in quite a freeing way is very exciting. And I think on the film you'll see two visual artists who work in very different ways, but what they get from working together as well as apart is very important. So, key points for discussion. One of the issues that we always come up against is how we scale up good practice. Our organisation is small, even though we're one of the biggest creative ageing charities in the UK. When I started this work 25 years ago, there was, I would say, 4 organisations working in res care or working with people with dementia in the country, and I knew them all. Obviously, some of them are still doing it, but luckily now I can't name all of them. So there has been a huge growth in interest, and also in organisations that do other work, also working with people with dementia, which is obviously what we want. But it's not big enough. You know, there are 18,000 care homes in the UK, and we're working in 60. If that's not good enough, there's too many people sitting, not having any sort of arts experience. I think it's a human right to have the access to art, and that's where we come from. That's the place we come from, that everyone needs to have that opportunity. I was talking to a friend whose parents have just moved into a care home, and my friend was actually in tears saying they've moved into a care home, they both have dementia, but they want to go out. They want to go out, they want to go to art galleries, they want to do what they would normally do, and the home is saying that they can't. And she said, and I can take them out sometimes, but they need to be able to have that access. So luckily we have a programme where we engage people to take people out to galleries and museums, and that's, for these people that will happen. But for the vast majority of people in care settings, that is not happening, and it needs to. So scaling up good practice has to be part of the social care kind of agenda. In terms of this work, it has to be part of a mandatory thing that care homes need to have, I think, arts access. I laugh, but because it feels quite a big jump, but I think it needs to happen. Creative exchanges to enable health staff to flourish. I think it's interesting in the NHS, the understanding that nurses are needing self-care, and there are some creative programs. I actually saw a fantastic creative program for nurses in Lithuania. So after a shift, which is extraordinary, nurses were going and doing creative practice and saying how incredibly important it was for their work. And that was one project in Lithuania. And I know that the NHS are looking at how to support nurses, stress levels, all those kind of things. And I think the same for care homes, both in terms of self-care and in terms of the ability to work well, and also particularly creative exchange around working with people with dementia, because we know that the ability to communicate through creative exchanges works. We've seen that a million times. It's transformational, that people can sing to each other in a way that maybe when somebody stops talking. The ability to dance together, the ability to be moved by each other by taking care and noticing, which is a great thing around art as well. So all those things we know work and we know are fantastic. They just need to be part of training for health staff. And I think that's the end of my slides. So thank you, Dominic.
So one of the things that pops up in your talk, which pops up in a few other people's conversations as well, but it's also popped up in with people like Anne Bastings at the moment, is about the role of creative practice in transformation. So, and there are several layers of transformation. So one is the artist and the individual. Okay. The second one is the institution.
Yeah.
The third one is becoming when the institution becomes porous. So it's families and friends, or it's But I think the fourth one is about links to the work of someone like A.J. Poo. So this idea that, you know, as populations live longer, as there is an increasing incidence of Alzheimer's and dementia, as there is an increasing need for people that care for those people, we therefore have to transform the way that we value those people that do that caring role.
Yeah.
And at the moment, we don't. We don't know, and we don't know how to, because we have a healthcare system based on acute care that doesn't know how to deal with chronic. And in the States, it's really evident, you know, a lot of undocumented workers take those positions. So it's interesting that you talk about the importance of the creative practice within that institution as being about the transformation of the sense of self and value of the nurses. And I wonder whether you might, do you formalise that, or is it better not formalised? It's kind of an interesting,
I think it needs. I think we're coming from such a, in terms of formalising things, because care staff, as opposed to nurses, have so little training, we are really at kind of baby steps to formalising how that would even happen. Because if you're thinking that care staff don't even get, you know, so they could be working at Asda one day and then looking after my granny the next. That to formalise the kind of training around what that means in terms of transformation is quite a leap, but we have to go there. I think it's a kind of societal thing about care and what care is. And the problem is, at the moment, everyone's experience is seen as an individual. So your parents might be going through it, my parents, but we're not thinking, actually, why is this happening? Why is it politically, can we do something about it that isn't just about money? I mean, it is about money, but it's about value and training. And in the UK, care settings are private businesses. So ultimately, they aren't looking at these things.
And because they're private businesses, they're not connected into the civic life, particularly.
Yeah.
So the work that you do with schools and care homes, I mean, that's in some ways that's a generational change piece. Now, do you want to talk a little bit about it? And,
I think that's an area where we can all do a lot more, and it's exciting because working with schools, working with communities, you get that change on a kind of very localised level, and that sense of who people are and the relationships that build And the care home's transformation about looking outwards rather than looking inwards, all those things are possible, and we've seen them, but we've just seen them on a small scale, and I think they can really grow. I think that's something that, as part of the kind of dementia-friendly agenda, it needs creativity, and that kind of transformational change around communities needs to be really kind of supported.
And then if I might add on to that, and then I'll share the mic. We in conversations that we had before, we've talked a lot about the fact that there is work going on at a local level.
Yeah.
Often challenged by things like austerity budgets, and then there is a conversation going on at a different level, a policy level, which is beginning to use the language of the work that happens at grassroots level, but there's a kind of gap in the middle.
Yes.
And you've been involved in a couple of things to try and bridge that gap.
Yes, I think you're going to be having a talk about the Creative Health, the all-parliamentary party group on arts and health, which has been happening for the last 2 years, gathering the evidence for this work, but across arts and health, with the idea that at a more local level, health commissioners can look at what arts provision there is, and social prescribing, which is becoming a big thing. I'm not sure if it is in Ireland, but the idea of people being prescribed something, a local arts group. I mean, the brilliant thing about that is when it works, people can have very transformational experiences. And I was working with, we've got a creative age group at a local, the Glass Centre, National Glass Centre in Sunderland, and the experience of those people who have had a dementia diagnosis but are living in the community and living in their own home still with a carer, with their partner who is a carer often, going to that art space, beautiful gallery, and making work, and the kind of importance that that has had on their experience of living with dementia. I mean, it's well documented now. We've got lots of documentary evidence about that, which is fantastic. So the importance of local health commissioners understanding the value of this work is incredibly important. And as you say, because local authorities now, particularly in the UK, are being under austerity, have lost a lot of the provision, arts provision, it's finding who in the community can deliver those projects and actually funding those projects from health budgets, which is incredibly important, and to be seen as being connected. Which will help people stay out of care homes, because carers are then enabled to support the person with dementia over a longer period. We've had a lot of evidence that carers feel supported by having really important arts experiences themselves.
Yeah, I've read research on the social prescription reduces the waiting room by about 30%.
Yeah.
And then so you have the reduced demand on GP, but you also have the extended ability of a carer to care for their loved one at home for a long period of time.
Yeah.
Does anybody else want to ask or add, or you good?
I'm just interested in the legal and human rights aspect, and whether you know of any work that's happening there. I mean, arguably under the UN Declaration of Human Rights, everybody is entitled to participate in the cultural life of the nation and so on.
Yes.
And for children, under the Convention on the Rights of the Child, it's equally clear. The problem certainly here would be enforceability of social rights like that. The courts generally don't tend to, it's a very slow incremental thing.
Yeah.
And it happens by degrees, and maybe children's rights to a child's right to education could now be enforced. 100 years ago it wouldn't have been.
Yes.
And how long do we have to wait before, and what can we do maybe to encourage the judiciary and legal system along in recognising these rights as enforceable? Because that would be transformational.
Yes. If people took to court the thing around dole. So at the moment, if you're in a care home and you're given a doles, which is a deprivation of liberty order, that means that the care home can say, actually you can't go out because you haven't got capacity, so you'll either harm yourself or somebody else. So doles is used all the time. I think there are lots of people who don't have doles orders who aren't being able to get out, and I think what will need to happen is those people to go to court on a human rights.
Yeah.
But as I said, it's a very individualised thing, so people aren't, and often aren't supported enough in a situation to be able to say, these are my rights, these are what I want to do.
Yeah.
But I think it is coming. I think the next 10 years around dementia rights, people with dementia having much more advocacy. That's what I hope is coming.
Yeah. The other aspect that I'm curious about is geographical location of care settings.
Yeah.
I mean, we all know that they are built in the most ridiculous places.
Yeah.
I can think of one that I'll be visiting at the weekend, and it's 10 kilometres
Yeah.
out from the urban centre,
Yeah.
with nothing in between, and no public transport links.
No.
And it's built on the side of a hill,
Yeah.
where people who are elderly and frail can't even go for a walk.
Yeah.
Now that surely is something where that's a fairly simple thing to provide for and legislate for if the will were there. That care settings have to be within reach of the community.
But that's an interesting one, because I know of lots of urban care homes which are right in the middle of a community that they never see, and until we
Right.
get involved, or that so.
It doesn't solve it on its own.
It doesn't solve it on its own. There's one next to a school, and the school always only came in at Christmas and sang carols. Now, for me, that just doesn't feel, you're not part of the community if you're not part of those things. So I think geography is interesting, and I think there is an issue around rural isolation and care settings, but I also think it's about will and resources.
Yeah. And of course, the private sector involvement is
Yes.
inevitably going to push the construction out to
Yes.
the cheapest possible land.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be using up valuable,
Yeah.
high-density residential space.
Yeah, yeah.
So there are new examples though. So Singapore has just rebuilt the middle of one of its cities around the idea of ageing in place.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
the idea that you did, so it's getting away from this idea that. So one of the problems with care homes is they were conceived as this fixed unit. They come, they're in the lineage of a workhouse. So we always put dribbling people away out of sight. So historically, that's what the framing was, and that's if you look at the architectural background to that, it was prisons, because they're built. Nurses' stations were modelled on the same way that a prison was. It was about how can you keep your eye on the maximum number of people with the minimum number of paid staff. So what's beginning to happen in a number of different places is conversations about the human rights of people who are locked up or prisons without doors. So they're people are made incapacitated because they're not facilitated to connect. And then what's countering that in a clinical perspective is the knowledge that connection is good for you, and you get less sick if you are if you belong, if you've got connection with people. In fact, it's the highest. It's one of the highest indicators of sustained living. So there's a whole cluster of really interesting forces that push in the favour of care homes that are porous, of care, changing the perception of care staff. What there isn't, I think, is really good prototypes and prototypes at scale. And one of the challenges, I think, and it's in the work that you do, is that you sort of have to grow the solution out rather than blueprint the solution in. And it comes up time and time again in things like Kate Goodwin's talk about the architecture of care, in the work that's coming up in Headspace. So it's and also the other thing that is happening across the world really is the scale of crisis is huge.
But also people are moving into care settings later. So what I've seen is that people are now often for palliative care, that kind of last 2 years. I think the average stay in a care home is now only 18 months, whereas a few years ago it would have been 5 years or something. So that means a lot more people are in sheltered accommodation, but are with a dementia. And those are becoming incredibly isolated because they haven't even got communal spaces necessarily. And then, of course, you've got people living in their own homes that are extremely isolated. So the kind of work that Anne Basting's done around people living in their own homes. We are doing some connecting people. Our Creative Friends project, which is basically like a matchmaking service for older people who are isolated through bereavement often. So we find what kind of creativity they're interested in pursuing and we match them with somebody else. So it's like making new friendships and then taken out. It's a lovely, really nice model that I think could work anywhere, really.
And there's also there's legislative work around that for things like Airbnb have just started doing work with what the equivalent of a ladies what do they call them, a ladies guest or whatever they call those, like long-term care. So basically you move into somebody's house, ladies companion. So that sort of idea is popping up through places like Airbnb, but also I just came across it in legislature in San Francisco, where they've got a housing crisis.
Yeah.
They've also got older people who have property space who are becoming vulnerable, and so they've adapted legislature to facilitate a
younger people.
Sort of rental agreement. Yeah.
No, that's a really good idea.
Yeah, good stuff.
I like that.
Thank you very much for your time, and Alice Thwaite.
No,
thank you.
Thank you for having me.
From today, the 7th of August, Claire Ford and me, Kate Sweeney, are moving in to Northborn care home, which is in Gateshead, and we are going to live there for a whole month. Everybody, as soon as you tell them, reflect on their own fears or their own experiences. So the residency really seems to, the idea of it seems to touch on quite a contemporary issue. I'm feeling really nervous, I don't know why. It's all those maybe human feelings. I hope people like me. I hope that when it don't get in people's way. What about the food? I think Claire and I must be a bit odd because we're both really, really excited about it.
The thing I'm most excited for, I think, to have more deeper, meaningful relationships, I think, with the staff and the residents, in fact. Yeah, I think that's what it is. To really find out really what is going on in a care home, because really we don't really know, because we're only in usually for like, 2 hours, and then we disappear again. So I think that's mainly what it is for me. And to spend time with Kate and to be able to like push ideas further and concentrate on one thing for a longer period of time. That's really what it is for me, I think. How does that look?
So just, call me.
Maybe see you tonight?
Yeah,
okay.
All right.
Thank you so much for your help with everything for the past 8 years.
Okay, that's been great.
It's been great. One of the ways that we decided we wanted to work was to have these sort of fragments and vignettes of work that slowly would weave together. The things that you would do would unfold and be responsive to the lives and the interests of the residents.
Oh yeah, well I used to do such a lot of things.
That's been, I think, quite an interesting thing for both our practices, on an evening or on a morning, sort of discussing where we are going on that journey. And that's the scary bit, is being open to it. Because actually your comfort zone is doing things that you know are going to work, whereas you might not necessarily know these things are going to work. We've just gone for it.
They've done photography, yarn bombing, hand casting, sewing, painting.
And they've had a lot of laughter.
Yeah.
A lot of laughter.
Because we're here all the time, we were able to have really long conversations with people.
You need to tell me more.
Look at me like a podcast.
It's quite improvised, and from our point of view it was like, well, oh gosh, what can we do with this?
One of the main things when you're working with dementia, and one of the things that both Claire and I believe in, is that the work is in the moment. The work is, the main part of it is happening right there and then.
One of the residents the other day, we knocked on a door and she opened the door and she said, "Where are we going? What are we doing?" So, that even though the dementia is there and she may be forgetting what she's doing with us, the familiarity's still there, and that memory of doing and being busy and helping and assisting and is very much there.
I think there's been a buzz when they've been here and people are looking for them, and those occasions where they weren't here, they've been missed.
I've never known a mum as settled and as happy, and that's what they need, isn't it? Just to keep them stimulated, and that's what she's getting here. Where's your scissors? Let's start from this.
Dementia has a lot of strangeness in its sentences that don't quite make sense, but there's gaps in those sentences that can be quite beautiful, quite resonant, quite powerful to hear someone. And so maybe art allows a space for that, whereas the real world doesn't know how to deal with it.
The staff are just unbelievable. I am not sure how people can actually do it for the amount of hours that they do, for the emotional and the physical care that they are giving to people all of the time. And that's been one of our challenges, is we want to really get that across to the wider community.
A lot of the hardest bits have been here, have been seeing how families and friends just stop visiting people, and that the emphasis for care and love and kindness falls on the staff. Emotional labour is often hidden. So there was a nice overlap for me when we started to think about doing these plaster hand casts, of trying to capture with the staff this idea of the emotional labour that's involved in the everyday sort of care. There are so many critical things going on in a care home. The medical side of it, just the existential sadness of death.
Yeah. And it's funny because
people died last week, and it's like those things do make you. They constantly make you think, well, why would art be important here, or why would creativity, and so you have to sort of realise you have to sort of try and find answers to them.
But I think that's probably what we've been, and why we're so emotionally exhausted, is that heaviness is really quite hard to shift when we're trying to do lighter things and immersive things.
It is, that's exactly
what it is.
Right.
So we're struggling with this whole concept that 2 people have died down the corridor, and we're trying to do something quite simple in the dining room, and you think, God blimey, is this really insensitive? Or are we trying, it's all of those questions all of the time.
You do get the feeling from the staff that you get on with that the right answer is to do stuff, because somebody might have died, but
there's another 30 residents living here.
There's a place, I think, for things that are a little bit lighter.
We aren't changing the world, we're just creating those pockets of positivity within such much more of a complex situation, really.
It's been a way for us to capture and, as artists, take away and hopefully make something resonant about what a care home is, what it's like.
Got glue in it, that.
I would like to share with the wider community some of the more small, lovely things that happen, because I think people focus on the bad. On Monday, the 4th of December, we opened our Moving In exhibition that captures really our aims and objectives of the residency. There is work that we've made with residents, and there's also elements of work by residents, but there's also an element to the work that is reflective of our sense of the process.
This was a piece that naturally came from the residency. Flo moved into Northborn care home at a very similar time to Kate and I. We had very similar emotions. We were going through the same questions, like who was going to be our friend, where we're going to sit at the dining table. So we jumped on the bandwagon of we'd like to do something in Flo's bedroom to help Flo settle in and to decorate it to make it a bit more personal to her. This is something that I would never ever get the chance to do, because obviously it's quite a deep-rooted project that, you know, I've had time to really get to know Flo and her family, and it's been beautiful for me because I've never had a chance to really link the digital side of what I really love doing, as well as the textiles and the practical. So it's enabled time for me to really delve deep into that and learn a new skill.
Quite a few dresses and a box of soap.
Listen to her accent.
You can tell she's from.
We did start off with this idea of cloth and wool and thread and connectivity. That has kind of weaved through the thing, hasn't it?
It has.
Yeah.
These postcards were put inside the envelopes, tied around the gates outside Costa, and we had lots and lots of replies from lots of different people in the local community. Get back to residents. I think it was only 4 days and we had to go and take it down
because then we were being inundated
bombarded
with replies. Which just goes to show you how much people do want to reach out and how much institutions have these invisible and sometimes real walls around them that keep communities separate. It's like people do want to connect to the people that live in their communities and that now live in care homes that are still situated in their communities but they can't get to.
It's brought the community in. It's given our residents the chance to express things that we'd never thought about.
I feel completely immersed in this setting. I've never ever felt like I can walk in and feel 100% confident. I just want to continue that relationship because it feels like it's getting deeper and deeper.
The aim of it was to develop us as artists. What we really wanted to do was get to the heart of what it means to make something with someone who won't remember that they've made it, and also who might pass away. That really makes you realise that as an artist you have to be collaborative, because then it's not just their stuff, it's also my stuff.
What I've realised is actually the biggest reward for me is the reward I've had personally from it. It's been a lot deeper and a lot greater because of that deepened relationship. It's been huge.
They've expressed themselves in different ways to just talking, and especially those with the dementia. It's unlocked a lot of things. It's been great for everybody, you know, the residents, the staff, visitors, everyone.
Totally soaked.
Sunset was the last